So, good evening, everybody. And once again, we are back with day 9 of this initiative of Civil's Daily called Daily Answer Wars and Daily Answer Wars Prime. So, again, in the morning, we had given you a question in the Telegram group, and I think many of you have written the answers, and I have checked some of the copies. So, again, in this session, we will be discussing the answer, basic framework of the answer to that question, and then we will go on to do some evaluation and checking of the copies that you guys have submitted. And I think most of the copies have also been peer reviewed, and I think your learning process is getting enhanced in that manner too. So now let us move to the question that was given in the morning. So we were covering beneficial for all of you. So the question today was about the Moplah Rebellion. Now the Moplah Rebellion was one of the most important rebellions that took place in that freedom struggle period, and it had like multiple angles to view. There are multiple angles to view about this rebellion, and it is often in the news because of some of the different takes that people or even historians have over this rebellion. So this becomes a pretty important topic. However, some of the core themes, we will not get into the controversial part and all. We will just get into the core themes. We will identify the reasons and all, and what all transpired during that rebellion. So through this question, we will try to cover this topic. So the question was, the Moplah Rebellion of 1921 was an expression of agrarian and political discontent which got intensified by religious identities. Examine. So you had to examine about the tail word here was examine. So you had just to talk about the Moplah Rebellion of 1921, and you had basically to focus upon what all was given in the question. So the question in the first place itself mentioned that it was an expression of agrarian and political discontent. So you need not take any pretty diverse view over what was given. You could have done that, but that was not beneficial in this answer, I will say, because that was again going into the controversy part and all. So you had just to talk about the agrarian political discontent which fueled this rebellion initially, and then you had to go a bit into this religious conflicts which helped in the intensification of this rebellion. So the rebellion that started with agrarian and political discontent got intensified by religious undertones. So you had basically to talk about first the basic primary reasons of like agrarian and political discontent, and then go into some points about religious identity. So this was a 10 marker, and I think 3 parts were required in this question. The first part was about talking about agrarian discontent, second was political discontent, and third was religious issues. So if you could have written 2-3 points in all of these 3 parts, I think that would have sufficed for your answer. In introduction, you could have just talked about the space of the rebellion, that is where it was located and how it started. And in the introduction, you could in the conclusion, you could have just summarized the whole part, whatever you had discussed in the answer itself. So now let us move to the introduction, like what all we could have written in the introduction. So basically, I have just talked about the region in which it started. So Moplah Rebellion refers to the 1921-22 uprising of the Moplah community in the Malabar region. So now this community was also called the Moplah community, or Moplah Rebellion was also the same rebellion. So you could have used that term also. And what you could have done extra was drawn a map showing the region, Malabar region, which was affected by this rebellion in the side. So Moplah were basically, I then go on to talk about who were the Moplahs. So Moplahs were Muslim peasants of Malabar region where minority Hindus had control over majority of land. So that region had some very peculiar circumstances. Like the region was basically occupied by the Muslim peasants. Like most of the peasants were Muslims, and but those owners of the land, like the landowners, were the Hindus. Like they were called Jainmis, and like they were in minority, but they had more power over the Muslim peasants. So that basically stoked the rebellion. So the rebellion was initially it was directed against the British colonial rulers as well as the feudal landholding class, which was primarily Hindu. So this landholding class also was target of this rebellion along with the British colonial rulers. So this was basically just introducing the rebellion, who were the Moplahs and against whom was the rebellion targeted and what was the region. So this was the introduction part. Next, I have written this linking statement that the Moplah Rebellion was an expression of various underlying factors as discussed below. And after that, I've gone on to talk about the factors. Now again, in the factors, I've just picked out subheadings from the question itself. For example, the first part is about agrarian discontent. So in agrarian discontent, what all you could have written? So one of the major issues was illegal extractions. What happened was peasant discontent against illegal extractions done by landlords in Malabar had existed since the decades of 19th century. So before this 1921 rebellion also there had been small revolts in this region, and that was due to the illegal extractions. So the landlords, those Hindu feudal landlords demanded more than what they deserved. So that was illegal extractions done, and this was one of the cause of simmering discontent among the peasants. Next was the issue of land ownership. Malabar's agriculture system was historically based on a hierarchy of privileges, rights, and obligations, which confined the land ownership to few privileged classes like Nair and Nambudiri. So these were the feudal landlord classes that occupied the land, and it always passed on to the similar, same hierarchy was followed in the next generation also. So this naturally angered the peasants of that area. Next was rack renting by landlords. So the landlord did not give any security of tenure to tenants, asked for high renewal fees, and charged high rents. So again, this is basically illegal extraction. Only talking about it in a bit of detail. Like I'm talking about the tenure of tenants. This was not fixed. They could be fired anytime when the landlords felt they were asked for high renewal fees and were charged high rents on the lands. So you could have talked about these 2 3 points in agrarian discontent. Then we move to the political discontent part. So in political demands were there. Manjeri Conference 1920 supported the persisting cause of tenants and asked for legislation of tenant-landlord relations. So tenant association was formed at Kozhikode to further the agenda of tenants. So this was also done. There was a tenant association formed, and this basically strengthened their demands for their rights against the landlords. Next, in the same time, if you can remember, the Khilafat movement was also started, and this movement was pretty famous in the country. Gandhiji was leading this movement, and it was in that same period. And this movement also helped the cause of the peasants. They were common gatherings for cause of peasants as well as Khilafat. So this encouraged the movement basically. Next, the Khilafat leaders were also arrested. Like after the arrest of Khilafat leaders like K. Madhavan Nayyar, Gopala Menon, Yaqub Hassan in the region, local Moplahs took over the leadership of the movement. So the movement became a bit violent after the arrest of these leaders, and the local people started taking the leadership. And you can understand that when non-accomplished local leaders start leading the movement, some amount of violence is expected to creep in. Now there was an incident that happened that also was a political incident which helped the cause of this movement, and that was the action of the district magistrate of Iranad. Now Iranad was a place in the Malabar region only. So the raid by DM at Tirurangadi Mosque to arrest Christ and Khilafat leader Ali Musaliar and subsequent firing by police on crowds became the trigger of the movement, after which Mapilaj started looting and destroying government property. So this gave fuel to the fire. Like this was a incident, or you can say the immediate cause of the revolt. What the DM did was not acceptable to the local population, and they started looting and destroying government property. So if you could have written 3 4 of these points, I think that would have been sufficient. And this was all about the agrarian and political discontent. But now religious discontent was also an important factor. So you have to talk about this religious part also, that how the religious discontent intensified this revolt. So in the next part, we go on to talk about the religious issues. So communal division of classes. Now I told you earlier that it was divided into 2 classes, Hindus and Muslims, and basically the peasants were the Muslim dominated class and the landlords or the landowners were the Hindus. So initially the unpopular landlords called Jainmis, who were mainly Hindus, were targeted along with government officers. So the peasants had grievances against these landlords also. So they were also targeted. But what happened was they targeted the landlords for their agrarian discontent, but it took the character of communal classes, because you can understand that again it was divided along Hindu-Muslim lines. So it went on to take communal character. But the clear religious divide of classes often turned the conflict into communal targeting. Now, support for martial law. Once the martial law was declared, many Hindus voluntarily helped the government. This further increased anti-Hindu sentiment in the region. So, what happened that when the British declared martial law in the area, some of the Hindus started supporting the government or spying on the rebels. So, what this angered the rebels in that region, and basically increased this anti-Hindu sentiment in the region. Now, alienation of Hindus, increasing incidents of violence, communal mobilization threatened Hindus who sided with the British for protection and safety. Again, also after spying, they sided with the British because they thought that they were lesser in number and the British could give them protection and safety. But this, in turn, increased the incidents of violence and communal mobilization. Also, wedge with the Khilafat and non-cooperation movement. The attack on Hindus drove a wedge between Mapilas and the mainstream Khilafat NCM ideology, which was based on non-violence. Local leadership often failed to contain communal overtones and threats against Hindus. So this movement had by then taken a violent turn, and therefore it was like difference was created between the Khilafat non-cooperation movement and the Mapila or Moplah revolt, because the Khilafat or the non-cooperation movement was basically based on non-violence, and Gandhiji was leading this movement. So it did not see violence till that point, and this movement had become violent, and therefore also like it increased the religious and communal overtones and threats against the Hindus. So you could have talked about this also. So basically, you had to just talk about the communal division of the classes and what was the stance of both the communities, like Hindus and Muslims, during the movement, and that would have been sufficient enough to like emphasize upon the religious divide that was created in this movement. After that, in the conclusion, you needed to just summarize whatever we had written. So I had concluded it by saying that Malabar Rebellion started as an agrarian and political rebellion. So as I told you, like started with this discontent was against the British as well as the landlords, but it was not against like Hindus specifically. But since the landlords were Hindus, it started to sway towards communalism. It alienated Hindus of the region and eventually led to the isolation of Moplahs and brutal suppression of the Moplah Rebellion. So finally, it was suppressed by the British. So this could have been the conclusion of this answer, and it was like just you can see that I've just summarized. I've talked about agrarian and political rebellion, and also talked about religious communalisms, and then just ended the answer. So this was the basic framework of the answer for today. Basically, the demand was to write these three parts, and you had to write 2 3 points in each of these parts, and I think that would have sufficed for this answer. So now we move to checking some of the copies, what all you have written, and evaluating what like what all difficulties you faced in writing the answer. So first we move to Dinesh's copy. So the Moplahs were the Muslim tenants inhabiting the Malabar region where most of the landlords were Hindus. Fine. Moplah community was dependent on agriculture consisting of cultivating tenants, landless laborers, petty traders and fishermen. So this is fine. He has just introduced the community. The Malabar Rebellion, also called the Mapila or Moplah Rebellion by the British, broke out in the southern taluks of Malabar in August 1921. So okay, so this is also fine. There you can talk about this. Okay, this is fine. You can just draw a region like a map of Malabar region if you wanted to get some extra marks here. The grievances centered around lack of security of tenure, high rents, reduction of field size operation by the officials resulted in widespread peasant unrest among the Moplahs. The government troops captured Kunahmad Haji. The rebellion had fizzled out. It largely took the shape of guerrilla type attacks on Janmis, okay, and the police and troops. The political mobilization of Mopilas in the region in the aftermath of launch of Khilafat and non-cooperation movement served as an opportunity for an extremist section to invoke religious idiom to express their suffering. The anti-government and anti-landlord movement acquired communal overtones. Communalization violated the Moplah from Khilafat and non-cooperation movement was called up by December 1921. The rebellion of Moplahs, inspired by religious ideology of a conception of an alternate system of administration, dealt a blow to the nationalist movement in the Malabar. So I think your concept is fine, Dinesh, but presentation is not very good. I will say after introduction, you can just go with writing according to the flow of the question. So first, like you have mentioned the points, for example, your agrarian discontent you have talked about here, lack of security of tenure, high rents, reduction of field size, operation by the officials. Write in point-wise format. I think that is better for writing such answers. It shows that you have like better presentation skills, and it catches the eye of the examiner also, that the guy has presented the answer in the way that was demanded from the question. Next, you can talk about some political issues also, like the immediate cause, for example, the action of DM of the Iranad region, that you can talk about. Next, you can also talk about the non-cooperation and Khilafat movement, which was at the same time sweeping the country. So those things were the political issues that were in vogue at that time. So you can mention those 2 3 points here. Arrest of this Kun Ahmad Haji can also be mentioned in the political issues. And finally, you can move on to the religious parts, religious intensification, where you can talk about attack on Janvis and Hindu-Muslim divide and all of that. So, and this dilution with Khilafat and NCM movement, all of this can be talked in that. So overall, your content is good, but I think if you could have presented it in subparts and mentioned point wise, that would have been better. And introduction, conclusion, I will say is fine. Like both the introduction and this part is fine. You could have just drawn a simple map showing the Malabar region in the intro if you had time and space. So I think out of 10, you will get 3.5 for this answer just because of presentation and like some points is missing in political discontent part. Like what all fueled the political discontent that could have been mentioned in a bit better way. So 3.5 out of 10 is what you will get for this answer. Next, we move to Manoj Ansu's copy. Moplah were the Malayali-speaking Muslim tenants of the Malabar region. Rising oppression of landlords led to Moplah Rebellion 1921, which was later intensified by religious identities. Okay. Nature of the rebellion led by Kunhamad Haji. This is fine. Agrarian, lack of security of tenant, oppressive political demand of legislation regulating tenant-landlord relations. Fine. Support by Khilafat Movement Congress, parallel government in Nizambur, separate passport, separate taxation. Okay, so here again some points are missing. For example, you can talk about this. It was not exactly supported by Khilafat movement. It was initially Khilafat movement helped it to grow. Like there were common leaders for both the movements, but after the arrest of the leaders, like the movement took a violent turn, which was not which again was separated it from the Khilafat movement. So be a bit cautious with the words. You can just talk about like it was influenced by that movement. And next, you can talk about the immediate cause, that action of DM Iranad, like that firing and all in mosques. So that was one of the important immediate causes for this movement. So you can mention about that. So after that, it will be fine. I think political causes and also try to explain a bit. For example, this demand of legislation regulating tenant landlord relations. You can just talk about it in one or two lines because it is not pretty clear from what from this like what was the demand and why legislation was required. So you can talk about that a bit. Next, religious and communal turnaround is fine. Triggering events is arrest of Ali Musaliar is okay. Martial law by British. Wagon tragedy is also fine. Oppressive Hindu landlords seen as helping the British authorities. Wide-scale communal riots, mass killings of Hindu landlords. Okay, the latter the leaders of Congresses. So you have actually understand the point. Here you have mentioned that the leaders of Congress distanced themselves. So that is good. Malabar Special Police Force, which was established in 1897, was given the responsibility to suppress the rebellion. Even though the rebellion turned violent communal, it signified the possibility of self-rule by establishing a parallel government. So I think better than talking about self-rule here, because this was basically the rebellion turned violent and communalism with communal undertones. I don't think you should maintain a balance here. Rather than talking about self-rule or establishing a parallel government, you can say that it just marked an important rebellion in the freedom struggle, and it had different people have different views over that. Or you can just summarize it like initially it started with agrarian political discontent, but it went on to take communal undertones. So that would have been sufficient enough rather than just praising and saying that this movement was successful in establishing a parallel government, because finally it was suppressed also. So there was no, like, you cannot say that parallel government was established and it continued. So you can make those changes in the conclusion, and overall your answer is fine. Just some explanation in this political discontent part would be better, and some one or two more points would be good. Otherwise, rest of the answer is pretty good. I think you will get 5 out of 10 for this answer, Manoj Ansu. Next, we move to Chinese copy. The Moplah Rebellion was a series of riots by the Mapila Muslims of Malabar, Kerala in the 19th. So, okay, it was so this was basically okay. This was a series of revolts, but this question is talking about the 1921-22 rebellion. So you can just stick to that 1921-22, and you can just mention do is other than mentioning the region of the revolt, you can talk about the main characters of the revolt. Like you can talk about the Muslim peasants and the Hindu landlords. Next, agrarian discontent part is fine. I will say land tenure system is good. The relations between the Muslim peasants and fine is okay. Uh, Religiously antagonistic. So here you can avoid talking about religion, because again I think you will write about religion in one part, I guess. Yeah. So when you are writing about religious identities, you will again repeat those points. So try avoiding that. When you are talking about agrarian discontent, go solely on agrarian issues. You can just talk about what were extraction of illegal rent and no security of tenure, renewal of fees, for example. These are good points, I will say. Discrimination, extractions practiced by Jainis were of high order and were often discriminated against the Hindu tenants. So this is fine. Political discontent part is also okay. Malabar District Congress Committee 1920. You have written about, I think, Manjeri legislation. So okay, fine. From this committee held at Manjeri, this committee supported tenants' cause and demanded legislation. Fine. Tenants Association was formed at Kozhikode. Khilafat movement was another motivating factor for the Moplahs in 1921. Arrest of Ali Musaliar after raiding a mosque. Okay, this is also good. Religious identities. Once the British declared martial law, repression began and the character underwent a definite change. Many Hindus were seen to be helping the authorities. The Moplahs were mainly against the Hindu Jainis. This gave a communal flavor to the peasant agitation. So you can also talk about like the vandalism done by the done on the communal basis. You can talk about like the movement went leaderless and like local leadership was what was leading the movement, and it went on to take violent undertones. So you can talk a bit about that, like the course of the movement. This gave a communal flavor to the peasant agitation. Movement was crushed completely by the British, and by December 1921, it had come to stop. Much of its defeat lies in the fact that it took. Okay, so conclusion is also decent, good enough. So this part, I think, religious identities could have been a bit better. For example, you could have just talked about what all transpired in this period, like what all events happened, like vandalism of police stations, over attacks on landlords. So you can talk about that a bit, and the rest of the answer I think is good. Both these agrarian and political part you have written in quite detail, and I think all of the points are mentioned overall. And intro is also good, but just talking about the main characters of the rebellion and the region, like a brief map of this Kerala region, could have added to your answer. So I will say you will also get 5 out of 10 for this answer signing. Next, we move to Sahiba's copy. The Moplah Rebellion or Moplah Rebellion of 1921 was the culmination of riots. Okay, fine. So she has talked about the characters against the British and the Hindu landlord. The year 20 will mark the 100th year anniversary of the uprising. Fine. So agrarian discontent, Malabar agriculture system. So rather than talking about 100th anniversary, this is okay. You can talk. You can just talk. Mention a linking statement here. Like you can give the idea to the examiner that what is coming next. So just you can mention that it started with agrarian political discontent and later on went to take religious undertones. Malabar agriculture system was totally based on hierarchy. This is fine. Genmi is okay. Same thing, I think. These 2 points can be integrated. New tenancy laws. British had tenancy laws that British had introduced new tenancy laws that tremendously favored the landlords known as Genmis. The new laws deprived the peasants of all guaranteed rights to the lands, increase in land tax security. So this is fine. Political discontent. Non-cooperation and Khilafat movement is okay. Company introduced several Western here you need to mention example. If you're talking about several western juridical concepts, you just need to talk about example, otherwise it will be a like blind point, like not clear what you want to say from just this statement. Indian National Congress supported the cause of Khilafat movement, and this meeting Malabar responsible for inciting communal feelings. So again, no, I won't say that the meeting of INC was responsible for inciting communal feelings. You can just talk about that arrest of Ali Musaliar and the attack on mosque. So those are more like close points to why, more close political points to why the this rebellion went on to take religious undertone. So I think those points are missing. You could have added it. So you can check it after the class from the good copies. Now, how their discontents lead to religious identities fueled by the fiery speeches. Okay, resistance which started against the British colonial rule and feudal system ended in communal violence. So okay, but here you can again talk about the role of both Hindus and Muslims. You can talk about that the Hindus were spying on the Muslims and they were decided with the British, and which actually angered the peasants of the region, and they again in on their part they started vandalizing and attacking the landlords and even the British police stations and all. So you can talk about those two things, like what was the role of both the classes in this period. Consequences of the rebellion is again not required. You can just conclude it by saying that it was suppressed. There was no such detail is required. Sir C. Sankaran, former president of the ANC, criticized Gandhi's support of the Khilafat movement, one of the cause of violence seen during uprising. So okay, but Khilafat movement was again like initial part. The movement was I can say that it was inspired from the Khilafat movement, but in the latter part it was again the leaders of the Congress distanced themselves from this movement. So in the conclusion, you can just end it with summarizing, although you can mention this statement of C. Sankaran Nair because you are backing it with some scholar statements, so it is okay. But I will say that go for just summarizing what all you have written in the initial parts. For example, you can just talk about political and agrarian discontent and then religious. And, again, in the latter part, it was like inspired by religious issues. So you can just talk about that and end it with that. So overall, I think this part, the religious identities part, can be written a bit better. Some points are missing. You can just talk about the role of both the classes here, and some points are missing in this part also, like political discontent. Here, you can talk about arrest of Ali Musaliar and all. So that will be better. This agrarian part you have written, I think, well, and introduction is also fine. So 4.5, I think you will get out of 10 for this answer, Saiba. Next, we move to Avnish's copy, also known as Moplah Rebellion. This is fine. Like, okay, so he has drawn a map. That is good. British colonial rule in Malabar. Okay, fine. Cause of revolt. British had appointed high caste Hindus in position of authority. To get their support, this led to protest. And no, British had not appointed. I think it was the hierarchical system which led to the ownership of land by the Nair and Nambudiri high caste Hindus. So you cannot just say that British appointed high caste Hindus. In fact, the Hindus were supporting British against the Muslims. So I think you don't need to mention cause of revolt here. You just go according to what has been asked in the question. Just talk about agrarian discontent first, then move on to political discontent. So this is good. Primarily, it was a peasant revolt during uprising. The rebels attacked villages. So okay. Now again, this was when the movement had taken like communal undertones. Assessment of the incident. Few historians debated whether the revolts were triggered by religious. Okay, Indian National Congress repudiated the movement and remained isolated from wider national movements. Some contemporary Indian national upheaval against colonial rule linkage with Khilafat movement. Ali Musaliar, okay, fine. Khilafat movement was introduced in the district of Malawar, fine. There was unpleasantries between the Mopilahs and Nars and mm, okay. I think you have got the content right. Most of your things are correct. You have understood the topic well, but I think again the presentation is not good. I will say because you need to go according to the question. You just need no need to introduce subheadings on your own, like linkage with Khilafat movement. You can mention it as a point when you talk about political discontent. So what all happened? Because this was a political movement. Khilafat NCM was a political movement, and in the ways it either inspired the Moplah revolt, or like it isolated the revolt. Both these things you can mention in the political discontent part. So go according to that. Talk about agrarian discontent first. Mention 2 3 points there. Then talk about the political discontent, and then talk about these actions of the both Hindus and Muslims. For example, these actions of the rebels, and also the uh, these things like what you have mentioned, like trigger between Nayars and Mapilas. All of this can be mentioned in the religious part, like role of both the communities and what all transpired could be mentioned in the religious part. So if you follow that flow, I think that will be a better answer. And overall, you just need to reorganize your content in that manner by considering the all our points. The We can conclude that initial phase of revolt was agrarian nature for us. So this is fine. Conclusion, you have summarized it, but I think presentation of this answer requires some effort. And intro conclusion of your answer is good, but body has to have some improvements. So I think Avnish, you will get 3.5 again out of 10 for this answer, just because the presentation is not that good. And I will suggest you to follow the flow of the question in order to make your presentation better. So I think that will be it for today, guys. Most of the copies I think you have peer reviewed, and also I have checked some of the copies. I will post the good copies in the Telegram group after this session, and you can update your notes and be ready for the notes war from by checking out those copies. And also try to just participate in the night owl discussions with all your vigor and enthusiasm. And again, we will meet tomorrow for the for some new topic, and take up a new topic and again discuss the answer writing in the evening tomorrow. So thank you very much, and keep enjoying this initiative. Keep answer writing, and we will again